Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass. This week I'm going to answer a question I've been asked several times over the past week. As many of you are aware, I've recently released the Chords for Bass Guitar course over at Talkingbass, and the question I keep hearing is, are chords useful on bass? And it's a good question because, let's face it, you don't hear chords that often on regular old bass riffs. So I'm going to give you 5 good reasons you should learn to play chords on bass and how they can completely transform and improve your bass playing and overall musicianship. So, number 1, chords can add interest to your bass riffs. Now, I know I just said that chords aren't very common in bass lines, which is true, but they are used occasionally, especially double stops. And when added into a bass riff, they can add a lot of colour, character and interest. Double stops are 2-note chords which you can just see as basic harmonic intervals. So an octave is a double stop, a third is a double stop, a fifth and a 10th, they're all double stops. So they are just 2 notes played together. Double stops are really useful because they can add a little chordal interest and colour without being too dense. So for interest, I could play a bass line making use of thirds or fifths. I could use some cool little Pino style hammer-ons. And I could add some tenths and maybe a little tritone for some bluesy dominant 7 slap action. So aside from all the other benefits, chords can be used in bass lines. They may not be that common, but when you do hear them in a bass riff, they can really add the character in there. Next, for number 2, we have improvement of your theory and harmony knowledge. Harmony is the most important aspect of music theory that we can study as bass players, and as you might imagine, harmony is the study of chord construction and use. Nearly every bass line and riff you're ever likely to learn or create is a result or expression of the harmony of a piece on some level. Even if you're just playing root notes along to a chord chart, that's harmony. You're working through a chord progression. It's the background of your musical picture. Chord construction is one of the fundamental aspects of harmony, and without a good knowledge of the notes in those chords, you're really just guessing. Now, it's possible to learn all about harmony through the use of arpeggios. Arpeggios are chords played 1 note at a time. So here's a chord, and here's an arpeggio. Okay, so same thing, just played 1 note at a time. And those chord tones in there are the key to creating cool lines through a progression. But learning the actual chords also allows you to understand chord progressions and voicings in a much more direct sense. You can actually play through a chord progression on the bass just like a guitarist or a pianist and hear the harmony in action. So this leads us nicely into reason number 3. Ear training. Now, we bass players have a really obvious disadvantage when it comes to transcribing and learning tunes. Because we don't play chords that often, if at all, we fail to develop an ear for chord qualities and chord movement. If you were to play this chord to most professional pianists, they would all be able to tell you that it's a major 7 chord. They could tell you that this is a minor 7 and that this is a dominant 7. But many bass players don't learn those sounds, and these are really simple chords. We also don't hear the chord progressions that well. Even something as simple as a 1-4-5 progression like this can throw a lot of bass players if they are asked to identify the chords without the help of an instrument. Again, most pianists would know the sound of that progression because they've played it so many times. Their ear for harmony is developed from the first day of learning the instrument. So by learning chords on the bass, we can learn the sound of that major triad, minor triad, we can learn to hear that more bittersweet major 7, the bluesy dominant 7. You know, those sounds become familiar and make for much better transcription and an overall improvement in musicianship. The 4th reason for learning chords on bass is technique. Chords obviously require you to use more than 1 finger at a time on the fretboard, so even just that can make things a little more demanding in terms of finger strength and control. You need the finger independence to hold down each note. You have to hold all of those notes down while sustaining the chord, and you often need the strength to bar across multiple strings depending on the chord quality. So even a simple minor triad like this F minor requires me to hold a note on the E string, that F, and bar across to hold down the A flat on the G string. So I'm playing on the E and the G string there and barring across, and this all requires hand strength, precise technique and stamina. Then in the right hand you have to make use of multiple fingers in picking each string. So this add 9 chord, spread across 4 strings, I have to use both the thumb and the 3 fingers in creating a finger picking pattern. Okay, so chords on bass demand that we make use of every finger available to us on both hands. Finally, the 5th reason for learning chords on bass is that they allow us to create much more interesting solo arrangements. We can make use of all aspects of music, from the melody to the chords to the bass line, in creating an arrangement of a song. This way we can create interesting practice material aside from our usual bass lines and riffs. The arrangement that I just played of And I Love Her by the Beatles is documented in Module 3 of the Chords for Bass Guitar course over at Talkingbass. I take you step by step through the arrangement from the basic melody and chords in isolation all the way through to the development of that finished arrangement. This is the icing on the cake in the final few lessons of the huge course that takes you from the absolute basics of double stops through to full triads, 7th chords, added note chords, inversions and much more. The course contains over 8 hours of video content and over 150 pages of lesson material, so there's plenty to keep you occupied for many months of study. If you want to learn how to play some chords on bass and really add some interest to your practice and playing, then just click the link in the info below or in the card to learn more about the course and enroll. The course is currently on sale with a 30% discount for the opening release week, so get on over there to grab a bargain while you can. Okay, I'll see you next week.